Hello, I am Red Mage, and welcome to a Magic the Gathering video featuring the color red. In today's video, we're adapting Mono Red Aggro to the new metagame with Murders at Karlov Manor. I have tried lots of different configurations of this deck, trying out a lot of the new cards, but in the end, the version that I came to had only 2 new cards in it, and those cards aren't even new, 2 shocks. I'm going to continue to try different configurations of Mono Red with the new cards, but the metagame seems to be evolving very quickly with things centered around the Boros decks with War Leader's Call. A lot of people are either playing Boros or playing decks that are good against Boros. And so what we're trying to do is kind of split the difference and be good against both the Boros decks and the decks that are trying to be good against those Boros decks. I think at some point there will be a little bit of an equilibrium that'll shift back and forth. There will be an ebb and flow of how much people are playing Boros and how much people are playing hate cards against Boros. But for now, I feel like it's very much strongly a part of the metagame, and so this is the configuration that I have come to. Specifically playing End the Festivities. That's the main tech, if you will, that I'm playing in this deck for Boros decks specifically. Now, it's important to note, this is not by any means a Plague Wind. You're not going to kill all of your Boros opponent's creatures when you cast an End the Festivities. But what you're trying to do is get maybe 4 or 5 of their 7 to 9 creatures so that when the next turn they cast their Imidane's Recruiter, you're not going to get killed all in one shot. So the rest of the deck is kind of a classic assortment of Mono Red Aggro cards, but the specific choices and the numbers are based on things that are happening in the metagame right now. So let's talk about shock first. I definitely started out with 4 shocks. In fact, most of the versions of Mono Red that I've played since Karlov Manor came out have included 4 shocks. There are definitely metagames where I think 4 shocks make sense. In fact, you could replace the 2 in the Festivities with 2 shocks in most metagames that don't specifically have the Boros menace. Shock is just not a very good card against Boros. It's fine if you pick off a key creature when it's small, but there aren't really key creatures that are small in the deck. The whole point is that there are so many of the creatures. That kind of just 1-for-1 removal, especially when it's just 2 damage, is not enough against Boros. It also is not really enough against blue-white control either. Play with fire, you at least get the scry. It's not that shock is bad. Trading in a card for 2 damage is perfectly fine in many situations against blue-white control, especially when you're playing Monastery Swiftspear. Speaking of the blue-white control matchup, End the Festivities is actually deceptively good against blue-white control. Not that it's a good card overall. Obviously, if you could magically have it removed from your deck every time you played a game against blue-white control, you would. But it can be quite good at cleaning up after a Wandering Emperor. If they exile your creature, it's left with 1 loyalty on the battlefield, and this is a clean way to both kill the creature and get a ping at your opponent. The one downside, of course, is that if you have a Monastery Swiftspear, you'd want to cast it pre-combat. That's just a call that you have to make. If they have 4 mana open, you probably want to just wait. I took out Voldaren Epicure in this version because I felt like it just didn't do enough. I wanted a little bit more power, and of course I needed room for the shocks as well. And because one of the best cards for Goddric, Voldaren Epicure, is no longer in the deck, I went down to 2 Goddric instead of 3. Opting instead for 1 Bloodthirsty Adversary. I have shied away from playing Bloodthirsty Adversary in my Mono Red Aggro decks in the recent past because of the dyssynergy with Squee, but it's not that bad. You're only getting 1 card out of the graveyard with the Adversary, especially playing only 1 copy. But this is something that is good on turn 2, and good later in the game. It's unlikely if you're mana screwed that this is going to rot in your hand the way a Goddric would, for example. And it's something you can reliably attack through opposing blockers, especially if it has a Kumano counter on it, which is not something that Voldaren Epicure can do very often, for example. I think you still want to play 2 Witchstalker Frenzy. Boros does have the Knight Errant of Eos, the 4/4 Convoke, that is a good target for Witchstalker Frenzy. There are still plenty of Shieldreds. There are still mid-range decks in the format. Plenty of larger creatures. It's good against Goddric. It's good against Monastery Swiftspear. So I think this is still something that you want, even though it's generally bad against blue-white control and not amazing, but decent against Boros. Finally, of note, Monstrous Rage. I was playing 3 copies and went down to 2. I encountered a few too many scenarios where I just didn't have a creature, or my opponent was holding up mana too much and it was too much of a liability. Just lots of awkward spots with 3 copies of Monstrous Rage, so I went down to 2 to alleviate some of that awkwardness. Part of that is from playing fewer 1-drops. Without Voldaren Epicure, or another additional 1-drop, there are plenty of other 1-drops in Standard. Without an additional 1-drop, and a few fewer creatures overall. With End the Festivities and Shock, that's 4 slots that were otherwise taken up by creatures. So Monstrous Rage is a little less good. It's going to be awkward a little more often because of that. Now, like I said, I've tried a bunch of different versions of Mono Red, tweaking here and there, playing dozens of games with not this exact list, but other lists. I had a roughly 56% win rate. That's not amazing, but it's pretty solid. This metagame is just a little rough. Having Boros and having blue-white control decks focus on temporary lockdown as a response to Boros, both of those things are kind of bad for Mono Red. We can fight through it and still get some wins. I don't think you should overreact. The Mono Red Aggro game plan at its core is still incredibly solid, so I don't think you want to change your deck too much to be good against Boros specifically, because doing so is going to make you worse against blue-white control. And so you really need to balance being good against both decks if you want to have a decent win rate in the best of 1 metagame. That being said, if you wanted to try a version with 4 End the Festivities and Mechanized Warfare, I think that makes a ton of sense. That's not the direction I've chosen to go with, but I think it would be a totally reasonable way to go. So I've had a roughly 56% win rate with similar decks, not including End the Festivities. Earlier in the metagame, right after the set was released, things were a little different and Boros hadn't taken hold quite as much as it has now. And now that it has taken hold so strongly, I think that End the Festivities inclusion is a good idea. So what you're going to see here is just the first 3 games that I played with this deck list, including one against Boros that was very interesting. In fact, I think all 3 of these games have really interesting decisions throughout the games. I hope you enjoyed the gameplay, and we'll be back at the end to wrap up. Well, we definitely wish that one of these was a spell, but I'm not going to mulligan 5 1 and 2 drops with 2 lands. Okay, looks like ramp. So they don't have blue yet, so they can't cast Leyland Binding. Okay. This is where it gets weird, because now starting any turn they could have a Wrath. Usually they don't play very many to populate. It's usually more Sunfall. I guess I'm going to start with Charming Scoundrel and discard to draw. I like to normally wait to cast Charming Scoundrel as the last card if I'm going to do that, so I don't have to discard. But it's going to be a bit before we get empty-handed here. Okay, Goddric is good. This might not be ramp. It might be some kind of tokeny thing. Ramp doesn't usually play basic swamps, I don't think. All right, so then we save this. We'll see what they do. And next turn we've got Goddric plus... What? Oh, okay. Just ramping. Okay. All right, so yeah, it's ramp. Next turn we'll have Goddric plus Swiftspear. What? Okay, so... All right. I mean, I think we definitely do it now. Since we drew the mountain, next turn we'll have Sokenzan. It's a little unfortunate because they're probably going to Wrath the board next turn, in which case all we're getting out of our Swiftspear is 1 damage plus pumping the Goddric for 1 more. But what are you going to do? I guess if they have a Wrath and they're sufficiently tapped out, we've got it locked up with Bloodthirsty Adversary. There you go. So this is a fine hand. It actually can work out very well on the draw to shock their 2-drop and then play a Charming Scoundrel on our turn 2. We'll see if it works out that way. Or we just shock their Swiftspear. I don't think we want to play Phoenix Chick. Since we're on the draw, I think it's better to make sure their Swiftspear doesn't get out of control than to get our 1 damage a turn in the air clock going. Okay. So it would have been nice to kill the Scoundrel with the Wicked Roll on the stack, but... Okay, so... We really need removal spells is what we need. It's going to be hard to race unless they stumble. But we also need mana. If we are to race and we don't draw another land, these Squees are just going to rot. So I think, as much as I hate making treasures with Charming Scoundrel, this is a time where it is appropriate to do so. Oh, okay. So, if they're playing Mechanized Warfare, then they are playing End the Festivities, right? That would make sense. It would make sense to play End the Festivities. We are playing End the Festivities, even though we're not playing Mechanized Warfare. I mean, obviously, if they have End the Festivities in their hand, we don't really want to play the Squee. We could play Swiftspear, hold up Lightning Strike. Yeah, I'm not really sure what the best play is here. If I knew their hand was full of lands and like shocks and lightning strikes, I would probably play the Squee. Okay, this is perfect. So glad that I held up the lightning strike. So now they get no damage in this turn at all. We're... What? Oh, because it's a trade. I think I'm down for this trade. These Squees are going to win us the game pretty quickly if we can maintain control, and I think it's much better to make this trade while we can because we don't have any more burn spells in our hand. Now we have a burn spell. I think we have to make another treasure. That's really unfortunate. Or we could just play the Phoenix Chick and hold up Play with Fire. That doesn't set us up for a potential Goddric, but it does allow us to either draw a land naturally or make a treasure later that we won't probably need to burn up on a removal spell. So we'll do that. Well, we can't successfully play with fire a Goddric. Okay, so they have nothing. So we probably need to race. I think we need to play with fire their face, and we're looking for either a lightning strike for the Goddric or a land for the Squee. Or I guess Witchstalker Frenzy would work. We can Scoundrel, make a treasure, attack with all. Okay. That's good. Do we want to leave back Charming Scoundrel to block? I think we actually do. If we can soak up one hit from the Goddric, that should be enough to swing the race in our favor. Now, if at any time they draw an End the Festivities, okay. Yikes. That's lethal. Damn. I guess it's... What? Okay. I guess I was wrong about the lethality there. In any case. Definitely going to keep this. Unfortunate to be on the draw yet again, but let's hope we're up against Boros and we can... Okay. Well, it is unfortunate. End the Festivities does not get a fair number of the Boros creatures, but it gets enough for sure. Okay. So we have a good aggressive curve of our own. We'll just have to see how crazy their start is. Warden. Do you have only one land? No. Okay. I'm not super worried about this Warden. A little bit worried about it. But if they're spending all their time on that, we might be able to just race them anyway. So I think here I'm going to go ahead and make a treasure with the Scoundrel. That sets us up for Goddric next turn if we want it. Or Swiftspear plus Lightning Strike. Or Swiftspear plus Shock. Save the treasure for later. Lots of options. Or we may need to shock something right here. Okay, so do we want to shock the Inspector in response? I don't love it. I guess we let it go. Maybe they will activate the Warden. It looks like they're going to. I mean, they're going to have like a ton of stuff going on coming up. Scrying to the top is not good. But we're going to be able to be pretty explosive ourselves. It is unlikely they can kill us next turn. I guess I'm going to leave the Scoundrel back to chump, although... Yeah, this is super awkward. We're not able to really... I don't know. I maybe should have played the Goddric there because we're not going to be able to enable Celebration on it next turn. Okay. Do you want to activate your Warden again? Probably. So, oh yeah, they'll do the Epicure and the 2 artifacts, and then they can attack with both creatures. Well, we'll see. I mean, oh right, Vigilance now. Yeah, that's going to put it out of reach. And they're just attacking with that, yep. Okay. So, what if we end the festivities and attack with everything? Then if they choose not to block, they die. But if they do block, we can kill whatever. Depending, of course, on how exactly they block. I think I like that. I mean, I don't like anything in this spot, but we have to do something. They know something's going on, but they don't know what it is. Okay, so in this spot, we have to Lightning Strike and Shock the Warden in order to kill it. So they will still have the Epicure, but we'll eat the Inspector with the Swiftspear, and the Warden will die. Oh, we got a trample damage with the Phoenix check. That's nice. So, we'll see. It's possible they can win the game somehow this turn. Okay. Well, not that way. So, they've got that Mirrex. That's going to... Oh, okay. Wow. They're going to draw, so they're going to have 2 fresh cards next turn, but they won't be able to play more than just a 1-drop and activate the Mirrex. They shouldn't be able to burn us out. So this is weird. I guess the problem is if we attack with the Swiftspear, it's still going to trade if they block and we Monstrous Rage it. So I think... Oh god, this is... I think we play the Goddric, no attacks, and then we'll try to win next turn with the Monstrous Rage. We'll see. If they have Gleeful Demolition, they win, because then they can still activate the Mirrex. But if... looks like they have it. Or they're going to cycle with the blood token. They're being slow. Okay, they're cycling. That means they don't have a Gleeful Demolition. Okay. Okay. Boom. You'll love to see it. So the one thing that we have to be wary of is they do have Witchstalker Frenzy in the deck. Some deck lists do play that. So what do we need to do here? I think we need to Monstrous Rage the Swiftspear, attack with the Swiftspear and the Goddric. The Goddric will deal 5 damage after we pump it, and the Swiftspear will trample over to finish them off. And that way we have the Charming Scoundrel back. We can block the Epicure if needed. Okay, that's the plan. It's so nerve-wracking that there's a stick. It's the Mirrex. It could be something else too, but the Mirrex is going to cause this pause either way. I suppose they could have reinforcements, but they've gone to block, so they don't have that. So this is lethal, right? 4 + 2. Yeah. I was just going to say we don't need to pump the Goddric. It likely wouldn't matter one way or the other. It's not like we have a spell to cast, but there's no need to do that unless they do something that would make it no longer lethal, and then we could go ahead and pump it. Forgot to feed the bear. It was hungry. And we're back at the end to wrap up. I think that this is a very solid deck list to go with. I wouldn't necessarily recommend any changes. I think we're still in the experimentation phase, both with new decks and different builds of Mono Red Aggro. The metagame has not settled down by any means, or at least I don't think it has yet. It's possible that we'll see mostly blue-white control and Boros for the foreseeable future, but I think things will get mixed up in the coming weeks, and we'll have to adapt to those changes when they happen. But in the meantime, I think that this is a good deck list to try to rank up with while we're figuring out what decks are good and what builds of Mono Red are good against the good decks. Let me know in the comments, are you beating Boros with any certain deck? Are you playing Boros? And what new cards are you excited to try? I'm going to be trying lots of different things, including continuing to tweak Mono Red Aggro. I'll see you in the next one.